for tuning in to another episode of the Spine Bookcast, Chronicles of a Bookshop, with your host, me, Lindsay Schultz, owner of the Spine Bookshop. Today, our guest is Terry Lancaster, author of Here Come the Nothing Heads, which is absolutely lovely, and it's a great little poetry book, and it's for kids, and it's just fantastic. Terry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you bet.
I'm good. It's been a little busy, but I'm good. Well, let's get into it. How did you get into reading?
I was kind of a weird kid. I started reading early, and I had an aunt. I remember my mom we'd go over to my aunt's house for like Sunday for family dinner, and everybody else would go off, be doing things and sitting in the kitchen yelling. And my aunt had the encyclopedia set, and I would go into the bedroom, grab a copy of the encyclopedia, and just read one book while I was there every Sunday. So I started reading, tremendously early, and I was a bookworm as a kid. I kind of grew out of that a little bit, but maybe not so much. I was a voracious reader as a child.
Oh, me too. That's really interesting, though, that you started with the encyclopedia.
I did.
My grandfather, and he did this with my mom too, if we ever wanted to know what a word was or how to spell a word or what it meant, he had this massive, 25-pound dictionary that would sit on this book stand in his office, and he would just point.
Yeah.
And he would make us go look it up. And I learned so many words that way.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite book growing up that you were reading when you were young? Did you have anything that was like, that was the book for you?
I don't know. Growing up, I started reading, and I skipped right past kids' books and young adult and everything. I read The Godfather, I think, when I was in fifth grade, and
Nice.
I did. Then I started reading Stephen King books when I was a small child, and I think I read The Stand when I was probably like a freshman in high school, maybe a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
And that book, literally, I read that book like every year for 10 or 15 years. It was, and then they came out with the unabridged versions. But The Stand was definitely, if for any time for the last, 30 or 40 years, you would have asked what was my favorite book, and probably still what's my favorite fiction book. I would probably say The Stand.
That's really funny that you say that, because I got in trouble my freshman year of high school because I was reading The Stand and some kid was making fun of me.
Yeah.
And and if anybody has read The Stand, you know how thick that book is, right?
Yeah.
He was making fun of me for reading it, and so I threw it and hit him in the face with it.
Yeah, book weighs about 5 pounds.
Yep, and I got in trouble for it, which was super hilarious to me. And yeah, and whenever you do anything like that, they're always like, "Well, why did you do that?" And I think my response was, he was being a dick. And I don't necessarily think that went over as well as I thought that was going to go.
Sounds better in your head.
Yeah. And so, my parents got a phone call about that. So, yeah. No, I have a tie-in with The Stand as well. So it's one of my favorite books by him.
Yeah.
Have you ever read Salem's Lot?
I read everything. Stephen King wrote up until the first time he retired. I think he said he was going to retire about 15 years ago, but I went for years. Every time he put out a new book, I read it. And Salem's Lot was one of only 2 books in my entire life, because I mostly read horror as a younger person. I don't really read much horror or science fiction or anything. Yeah, don't really read a lot of fiction much anymore. But Salem's Lot is one of 2 books that I read that I had to put down in my life and go, maybe what. I'm just gonna take a break. I'm not gonna be reading that for a few minutes. That's just a little too much right now. And
yes.
So Salem's Lot, I had to put down and come back, during daylight hours when I was outside and felt safer to pick it up and read it. The other one was Hannibal by Thomas Harris.
Oh God, that movie is the movie, the whole book series, that whole
Yeah.
thing is outstanding. I love that you said Hannibal because I've read the whole series.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with Salem's Lot and having to. Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
I need a moment. I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
go
take a
watch.
break and go smell some flowers or something for a little
Yeah, yeah,
while.
yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that I like about books is that you can have, you'll be reading something and the book is so good that it just like, we're done. I need a moment. This has just freaked me right out. And
Right.
I love that books can elicit that kind of emotion. You still there?
I am.
Okay. So yeah, I do you have a favorite book now as an adult?
As author, my favorite books are the ones I've written. I love my books.
Of
So
course.
they are my babies. And Here Come the Nothing Heads is my is definitely my baby right now. But I've read a lot more nonfiction probably for the last 10 or 20 years. And for nonfiction books, there's a book called Stumbling on Happiness
Okay.
by a Harvard psychiatrist. So actually, combination of two books. Any podcast I've ever done, someone asked me what my favorite books are lately. These are the two books I tell them. Stumbling on Happiness. I believe the man's name is Daniel Gilbert. He's a Harvard psychologist, and the book is about finding happiness where you least expect it. Stumbling on happiness. And another one is a book by Nassim Taleb, a book. There's actually a couple of books. One called The Black Swan, and one called Fooled by Randomness. That basically tell you that everything you think you know is a product of odds and chances, and odds and chances are it's going to be much different than what you think it of. And this book introduced me to the concept of the narrative fallacy in real life. Especially readers, we spend so much time chasing the story, and story is so fundamental to the way we see the world. Story is so fundamental. Story is the native language of our brain. That's why writers get so involved in their stories. But story is so integral that Nassim's concept is that sometimes in the real world, well, actually more often than not, we're making up the story. We're crafting the story to fit what we want it to believe, instead of taking the elements from the real world. We take various elements from the real world and we build a story to fit those. And then, sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't. But we see the world through a narrative fallacy. So the combination of those two books, of us creating our narrative fallacy, and then the Stumbling on Happiness and finding it where you least expect it, kind of changed the way I view the actual real world.
I can see that the whole viewing things through the story and narratives and because I mean even the way we have conversations with people, it's not just hey let me tell you something. It's oh my god I've got the best story.
Right. Yeah.
So I can totally see what you mean about things being a narrative and there's always two and we are in the phrase there's always two sides to a story. So I can kind of see what you're saying with that.
There's actually infinite sides to the story, and the thing that got me is especially Nassim. It was basically a lot of it had to do with the stock market, so it was very technical. But if you watch any newscast, especially if you watch the newscast and they get to the part where they're predicting about the stock market, they're talking about the stock market, and one talking head on TV will say the stock market went up 100 points today because Dow Jones blah 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 blah. And you
Right.
turn it over to another cast, and there's another the stock market only went up so many points because this thing and that thing and the other thing, and everyone's making up a story to tell what happened instead of just telling what happened. They're making up a story when they actually have no idea. It's all a mix. There's a million sides to it. So in order to
Mhm.
tell the story, you got to pick a team, right? And
No, absolutely.
that's what everyone does. They pick a team. They pick a side. They pick a story.
I think that's a really fair assessment of how things are done. I really do. I hadn't thought about it that way before. Um, so I want to talk about your book, Here Come the Nothing Heads. So it's a
Please,
poetry book.
it is.
How did you come up with that?
Well, I've spent the last 40 years of my life as a writer. I got a degree in journalism. I went to work in radio, and I've been writing mostly 60-second blurbs for radio spots for the last 40 years. That's my day job. And
Okay.
when I started writing books, I said I'm going to write I'm going to write 50,000 words. That seemed like a daunting task, but I wrote a couple of 50,000 word books. I said, hey, look at me, I'm a big time writer, dude. But I sat down, and it just occurred to me I've spent so much time the last 40 years writing little blurbs of things for the ear.
Right.
And that's really where my talent is, writing these brief, concise phrases that become kind of memorable and repeatable. And people come into a car dealership and say, nobody beats Bob Jones Ford, nobody. Then so I've been writing for the ear for a long time. And I had a client who wanted me to write a Dr. Seuss commercial. It was a car dealer in North Dakota. He wanted me to write uh, not a Dr. Seuss commercial. It was like a Grinch commercial. We wrote a commercial for him around Christmas time, like in the style of the Grinch.
Okay.
I guess that is Dr. Seuss. And he and I wrote it, and I said, hey, I like that. And I enjoyed that. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to write a children's book in the style of Dr. Seuss. I like writing for the ear. I like writing the brief things. And I started writing it just as a nonsensical Dr. Seuss book. And at the same time, I was listening to. I've been listening to a lot more books lately than reading. I was listening to a lot of. Actually, a lot of Buddhist books, a lot of Zen books, a lot of neo-spiritual books, Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts and that sort of thing. So when I started writing this children's book in this nonsensical Dr. Seuss style, as I started writing, it kind of morphed into a book that maybe Eckhart Tolle would write, or something that a lot of the concepts from Alan Watts, they kind of all got mixed into there, and it turned into something that I really wasn't expecting when I started writing. I was just writing it for the experiment of writing, and it turned into the blurb on the back says it's Dr. Seuss meets the Dalai Lama meets the dude from the Big Lebowski.
I love that you mentioned Alan Watts and the Big Lebowski in the same like conversational discussion because I love both of those.
Oh
And
yeah,
I like the fact that you mentioned Alan Watts because my brother loves Alan Watts. And I've read one of his books and I really like the way he talks about things and just just the way that he thinks about things. So I love that you mentioned Alan Watts because he's one of my favorites.
Well, I think Alan Watts takes a lot of the Eastern mysticism stuff, the Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, the stuff that Alan Watts talks about. Is so exotic and mystical to the Western ear, to somebody
Mm-hmm.
from Nashville or Tullahoma, Tennessee. Talking
Mm-hmm.
about those things is a little outlandish. But Alan Watts takes them and takes the smoke and mirrors and chanting gurus and everything out of it, and
Sure.
just talks about it like I mean, he talks about it like a stoned '60s college professor, which is I guess what he was. So
Yeah.
it's not completely like two people talking, but it's more normal than listening to Buddhist monks chant. And
Right.
so what Here Come the Nothing Heads does is actually takes a lot of the concepts that Alan Watts talks about and expresses them in a more fundamental, ear friendly way than we're used to hearing them.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. And I remember the first time that I heard anything by Alan Watts, it was something I heard on TikTok. And I
Right.
remember that it was just like, and it was his voice that someone had um, put onto like music or something like that. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, that's literally like the best. thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And I'm trying to look for it. So but I just remember thinking, we're going to get a train here in just a minute. Just so everybody that knows, the bookshop's next to a train. So you're going to hear that. So we're going to take a pause because it's coming. I can see it. And there you are. I'm literally maybe 50 feet away from the train track. And I absolutely love it. It's so much fun. But would you say that Alan Watts has like shaped how you write and how you read and that kind of stuff?
Well, I think so, in the fact that Alan Watts was part of my transition to audiobooks. You talk about the TikToks thing, and that's where I first got introduced to Alan Watts too. You would see these little 15-second TikTok videos, or 5-minute YouTube videos that someone's mixed some music to, and they take this little blurb out of Alan Watts, and it's interesting, and it's hippy dippy, and it's a lot of stuff. But the meat of it was, because because I saw some of those and said, well, that's kind of interesting. Wonder what his books sound like. And most of his books, they end up taking like a 2-hour lecture. He would go do these seminars and get a bunch of the hippies around. They would sit around for 2 days, and he would talk for 2 straight days about whatever he wanted to talk about. But if you go into basically some of his seminars where he gives a full 45-minute presentation on something, and it explains, it is more intricate and more detailed and not more lofty, and it really starts to sink in some of the things that he talks about the way things work, the way the world works, the nature of reality.
The first thing that I ever heard about Alan Watts was when he said something like, and I'm going to read this quote, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read some of it. Well, now, really, when we go back into falling in love and say it's crazy falling, you see, we don't say rising into love. There is in it the idea of the fall, and it goes back, as a matter of fact, to extremely fundamental things. That there is always a curious tie at some point between the fall and the creation. And I remember when I heard that, I just thought, I have never, ever, ever thought of anything regarding love like that.
Yeah.
So I say that to go back into my point that when you read something sometimes, like what you did with Alan Watts and Dr. Seuss and your story, with your poetry, The Nothing Heads, you read something and it just, you have to sit there and think about it for a minute because it literally just makes your brain kind of go, da-da-da-doosh. Because it just hits you in such a way. It's one of the things that I love about reading so much.
Well, and I think one of the things is reading a lot of times. Then this is very definitely an Alan Watts concept and a Buddhist concept too. Is that the reading and the words, they're not the thing. Right? The words aren't the thing. The story on the paper isn't the thing. The menu is not the meal. That's an Alan Watts thing. The menu is not the meal. The map is not the territory. We get caught up in seeing the menu, seeing the descriptions, hearing the story. But there's always something deeper that the words point to. The truth is behind the story. The truth is behind the words, and the story can only point there. So that's the beauty of any writing, is that there's always the possibility for that moment of clarity when it all clicks and go, oh, that's what's behind that. Mm-hmm. That's the truth behind the narrative.
And I think too that you can take a book, say, To Kill a Mockingbird, because if anybody's listened to this podcast, that's one of my favorites. And you can hand it to 5 people and have 5 people read it. And each person is going to come away with something completely different from that book. Like their experience with that story is going to give them something that is completely different from everybody else. And I also, to go further into that, you can take those 5 people and have them read that book at different stages of their life. And they're going to get something completely different from that book, depending on what's going on in their life at the time that they're reading that.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I got an email The other day, I actually a text from a friend of mine said, "Hey, I was just talking to someone about your book. Here Come the Nothing Heads. I got a question for you. Is this book a children's book or what?" And I go, well, yes. They go, listen. I told them it was a children's book, but they said it's like all this other stuff. And I said, listen, it's whatever you want to be. She said, I thought it was just for amusement. I said, well, it is for amusement, but there's more. And she said, well, what's it about? And I go, well, what I think it's about ain't got nothing to do with nothing. The important thing is you to read it and see
Yeah,
what it means to you.
exactly.
What does it point to for you?
Exactly. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's really interesting that, well, what does it mean? Well, it doesn't matter what it means to me, and like, we do a local author book club, and sometimes we'll be reading something and there's this one person in here and it kills me. I'm so glad that I know her because every single freaking month she will read the exact same thing that I do and come away with a completely different thought process about what we're reading, or she will catch something that I will sit there, wait, I didn't read that. I mean, I did, but it didn't hit me the way it hits her. And it's one of my favorite things about being friends with her is because she always has me think, wait, where is that in the book? That didn't even occur to me. That's dang. And she always like catches stuff. And I really love, it's one of my favorite things I think about books and reading in general is that it's just the experiences that it brings you to read something, and it makes you think and it makes you feel things. I
Right.
love that about books.
Yeah, it opens them up, and the words are just squiggly lines on paper. The word. I mean, I've been a words guy for a long time. It's taken me 60 years to get to this point. My job for the last 60 years has been placing words in pleasing orders to achieve a desired result. That's my entire job description.
Sure.
And I have a degree in journalism for placing words in particular orders to achieve a desired result. And it took me 60 years to realize that the words aren't the thing. The pleasing order is not the thing. The words are like a combination lock to unlock what's behind them, to
Yeah.
unlock the story behind the narrative.
Do you have a favorite word?
I do. My favorite word are actually two words. I have two favorite words, and both of which have to do with exactly what we've been talking about. Number one is the word glossolalia. Are you familiar with the word glossolalia?
I am not, but I'm really curious to know what that means.
Glossolalia is a religious term. It means speaking in tongues. It's speaking in tongues. It's the particular religious denominations that when they reach their religious fervor, they think that God speaks to them in a hidden language, and that language comes out in the religious fervor, and they have this glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues, which is the words don't mean things except for to the person who speaks them and to the God who gives them to them. So it's the private language of God coming out in moments of ecstasy and fervor.
Okay.
So, and then the other one is paradigm. Paradigm is I've been fascinated by this word for a long time, and it is basically the window through which you see the world. Everyone sees the world through an entirely different window. Everyone has a different paradigm, and if you can change the world by changing your paradigm, and again that's the window through which you see the world. And a lot of times the words are the window. Actually, all the time for us, the words are the window through which we see the world. I had a big argument with someone the other day that I told them, "You've never had an original thought in your life," and people get irritated if you say that to them.
Well, it's
Um,
true.
but it's true because to tell me how you're going to have a thought that doesn't have a word, and words are something invented, some squiggly line that someone made up 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago,
Yeah.
and everything has been formed and created this paradigm that you're seeing the world through now, basically mostly through language. That's how we create our paradigm. Um,
Right.
but if words create the paradigm, then words can give you the opportunity to build a new paradigm.
I remember having a discussion with my mom one time where we were talking about um, what was mankind's greatest invention. And everybody generally, when asked that question, sits down and thinks, oh, it was penicillin, which wasn't really a discovery. It was, or an invention, was more like a discovery, or, the wheel, or, that kind of stuff. And my mom is the first one that ever, like, floored me with her answer. She said the invention of writing things down.
Right.
And I remember thinking, why would that, because I think I was 15 at the time or whatever. And I remember going, what? And she said, think about it. If we never learned the ability to write things down, we never would have learned to read. We never would have learned to do research, write things down, share that research with other people in our education. If we had not learned to write things down, our entire foundation of learning and discovery and education would not exist.
Yeah.
And I never thought about that. And so every time I read now, I always think about that. Like, I wouldn't have this book if someone had not discovered how to write things down.
Yeah, and a very Alan Watts way of looking at that is, because if it's the greatest invention this mankind's ever had, it may also be the greatest horror that mankind has ever invented, because giving us those words allows us to become trapped in the narrative of our creation. We get caught up in and chasing our own tail, swallowing the snake's tail of the words that we invented and the stories that we tell, and we go down these manholes and forget the actual truth, the way it was before words.
Yeah. That's God. Now my brain is like spiraling of all the things that I'm thinking about. I think I need to go back and re-listen to Alan Watts, because every time I listen to him, I find something new.
Yep, I highly recommend that.
Do you have a favorite book by his?
There's I don't. I've got like 4 or 5. And I will send them to you so you can put them in links to this. Actually, I've got a page on my website, Zen audiobooks of all the books I've listened to for the last couple of years, and I don't remember what they're called, but the ones that I enjoy from him are the ones where they're not written books. They're actually just basically copies of his lectures, where he sits down and has a talk. He's got a couple where he wrote the book and then read it. There's a couple that he's written and someone else has read, and then there's also an autobiography of him that's interesting, but I didn't like it near as much as his philosophical talks.
Okay. I have one that I read by him, and it's something about anxiety.
Yeah.
That someone sent me when I was diagnosed with it, and it talks about anxiety, and I can't remember what the title of it is now. But I remember, I listened to it on tape, and a lot of the books on tape, you can listen to Alan Watts actually reading them.
Right.
And his voice and just the things that he says. Same thing with the Buddha, or what is the guy's name that did the the key to happiness, or whatever. The Dalai Lama wrote a book about the key to happiness, and
the art of happiness, I believe.
That's the one. Yes, right. Thank you. God, sometimes I cannot think. I've read so many books, sometimes I can't come up with titles. But yeah, I love that you have a book, like what you're talking about, like I'm talking about. And I will say that is one thing that I've consistently discovered with every single person that I've talked to on this podcast, is everybody has somehow had a book just drastically affect their life in some way. Yeah. And I really love that you mentioned, you're the first person I've said that has mentioned Alan Watts.
Well, I pulled up Audible. Here's the 3 most recent Audible Alan Watts books I've listened to: The Power of Space and The Power of Space and Reincarnation is one. Okay. Reality, Art, and Illusion is another, and Leave It Be by Alan Watts.
Okay, I've seen the Leave It Be, but I
Yeah.
haven't. So are you working on anything else right now, book wise?
I am. I'm working on another book in the format of Here Come the Nothing Heads, which is going to be about a 5,000 word, 30-minute audio book, Dr. Seuss poem, and it is basically the prequel to Here Come the Nothing Heads, and that
Oh,
is
fun.
how the Nothing Heads. It's going to be about how the Nothing Heads, the origination of the Nothing Heads.
Okay. Okay. Why the Nothing Heads? Like what? Like how did that title come about?
I don't really know. It popped into my head and it seemed like a pretty nonsensical thing. And it was amazing to me that it was nothing heads had not been co-opted and used to describe and the nothing heads in the book Here Come the Nothing Heads. The nothing heads are a mysterious tribe of people who live in a place called Happy Hollow, and they basically do nothing. They're nothing heads. They go through life living a simple life, putting one foot in front of the water and of the other, carrying the wood and chopping the wood and carrying the water and doing what needs to be done without worrying about keeping up with the Joneses and granite countertops and new cars and that sort of thing. They are the nothing heads, and the origin. Well, actually, I guess the origination of the nothing heads popped into my mind listening to a lot of these neo spiritual books that I was talking about, and they talked about the concept of no mind, which is a Zen concept. The purpose of meditation is to achieve no mind. To
Okay.
achieve the blank slate, so that without the story, where there's nothing there, and that's the nothing head. Someone with no mind, someone who has erased their ego, someone who is just is just interacting with the world instead of interacting as a thing. Someone who's of the world and not a thing in the world.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. This discussion has totally gone a different way, and I love it. Love it. Um, is there a fiction book that you've read that has not been made into a movie that you would love to see made into a movie?
Let me think. I can't. I'm trying to think of one, and I know there's one because I've talked about it, and I'm completely drawing a blank. They the Ayn Rand book Atlas Shrugged. Then they ended up making a movie out of that. I waited a long time for someone to make a movie out of that,
Uh huh.
and I'm drawing a blank. I'll come back to it.
All right, so there's the Ayn Rand books. Hang on, I've got them on my shelf. There is the Fountainhead, Anthem, and then I'm not sure what the other one is, but
Atlas Shrugged.
that's the one.
Right.
And I think they made one of them into a movie, but
They did. They made them into. They weren't very good movies. I think let's put it that way. I wish someone would make a good movie out of those.
I find that happens a lot
Right.
with books that I really, really love, and then they make them into the movie, and usually end up having that. Did you read the book?
Yeah.
Did you read the book? Because if you made this movie, it tells me that you didn't read the book.
Yeah. Well, I've come to accept really that the story there, making movies and writing books, there are two completely different kinds of storytelling, and books to me, they work. Talk another Stephen King book that there was a great book, and several Stephen King books, but the book the Shining was
Oh
a
my
great
God.
book, and then Stanley Kubrick made this great movie, but those really have nothing to do with each other. The movie and the
No.
book they're only tangentially related, and because Stanley Kubrick is such a great movie maker, he made it into this one thing, and Stephen King made it into this other thing. Because the words are again only there to point to what's beyond that, so everyone can muffle everything around however they want to, and so I've really come to try to accept movies as their own thing. And actually, I prefer to do it the other way now. Is I'll watch movies, and if they're good, I'll go read the book because there's so much more. The movies are like a little trailer. I can read.
Oh,
I can.
absolutely.
I can read the I can watch the movie and then go, oh, I'm going to go deep into this and actually read the book. And like with Stephen King, if there's one narrative in the story in the movie, there's going to be at least 10 narratives in the book because so much goes deeper into psychological, and so many things never even get brought up in the movie, probably even spoken aloud. So much Stephen King takes place in someone's brain that they couldn't make a movie out of that if they tried.
Right. I will say, that 95% of the books that I read, when they make a movie, it's like, oh God, here we go. But
Right.
I will say that for me, one exception that I can think of currently is Where the Crawdads Sing, because I loved that book so much. It is such a beautiful piece of fiction. It is beautiful. There's no other way to describe that story. And so when I heard they were making a movie out of it, I thought, oh God, there's no way. There is no way that you're going to be able to translate the loveliness of this story onto a film and still have that fantastical, lovely sweetness and seriousness, which is very much like, it's a very fine line. There's no way it's going to come across in a movie. And so I went to go see it with my friend who had also read the book, and we both were sitting there fully prepared for it to be horrible.
Yeah.
They did a fantastic job.
I thought the movie, I haven't read the book, but I think the movie was fantastic.
Oh, the casting was perfect. It really, really was. And they hit all of the high, because I know when you're taking a book to screen, the adaptation, there are certain things that have to be left out because you can't make a 5-hour movie. Totally get that. But they picked all the right highlights. They picked all the key points, and that's what they filmed. And the relationship between the gas station owner and the girl, that delicate, beautiful, lovely friendship that they had with the husband and wife and the girl, they did that really well. I thought it was just amazing that they were able to transfer the loveliness of the story from book to screen. And they can't do that very often, because there are several authors that I've read, and I'm just like, oh God, no, don't do it. And I think, like when you said with Stephen King's The Shining, the book is terrifying. Right. And the movie is terrifying. But if you start comparing them, you lose something, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, they are each their own thing.
And I definitely think that there are some movies that are great, and then there are some books that are great. But sometimes if it's from book to screen or screen to book, you definitely lose something.
Yeah.
In the adaptation of it. So how did you get into writing? Like, how, I know that you said that you majored in English, but like, how did you decide that you were going to start writing books? Like, how did that translate for you?
Well, I wrote, in college and in high school, I dabbled with I started a million different little short stories, or, wrote a couple of things and never finished anything. And so my first book was, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I just, I decided that, a midlife crisis, I guess. And I decided I've been doing all these things, and I've been thinking of myself as a writer. And I always, when I graduated from college, my life goals were to retire early and write the great American novel. It's always been on my
goal.
Right. It's always been on my bucket list to write a book. And at some point I decided, Terry, you big old dumbass, if you're a writer, sit down and write. And I just decided I was going to do it. And I didn't even start writing a book. I quit drinking. There's the truth. I quit drinking. I quit drinking, and all of a sudden I had more free time and clearer brain. And I started blogging a lot. I said, if I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to write. I started blogging, and I wrote this blog about self-improvement, personal improvement. and
Okay.
some stuff that I was doing after I quit drinking, exercising more and eating right, and meditating and learning to be in touch with the nature of reality. And I wrote blog posts about that. I did that for a couple of years, and at the end of a couple of years, I looked at that, and I've got couple hundred blog posts here, and I go, hey, I'm no math major, but if I've got a couple hundred words blog post and a couple hundred of those, I should be able to put that together into a book. And so I said, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna at long last write the book I've been threatening to write for 40 years. So I took the original blog post and started editing those and building a format and outline, and wrote a book called Better: Self-Help for the Rest of Us, and
Oh, I love that book.
it's
We
about
have that
giving up
shop.
the pursuit of perfection and just being who you are better. And so I wrote this book, and I thought it was a pretty original concept there, because if you go into the bookstores, everyone who's writing self help books, they're already gorgeous, and they got beautiful teeth and 6-pack abs, and they don't look like they need help. So I wrote the book for regular people, and I thought I had an original concept, but nobody's ever had an original concept, and this is what I discovered, because that book, Better: Self-Help for the Rest of Us, that I thought was completely original. It actually just takes a lot of ancient philosophy, the philosophy of Kaizen, which is not so ancient, which it talks about in the book, but Buddhism and Stoicism and some of these ancient philosophies that people live by until we got caught up in the whirlwind and rat race of the modern life, trying to be everything to everyone every day. And
Mhm.
this book, I wrote this book about simplifying the process of being a better you, and that led me into more discovery of Zen and the elimination of you. So. Yeah, it's funny. I wrote the book for self help for the rest of us, and then ended up writing a Zen Buddhist book that tells you there's no self to help. So
Oh, no, no, no. I think there's always a self to help. And I said I've told this story a couple times too. When I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and trying to tell the people in my life, this is I worry all the time and I freak out, and it's hard to verbalize sometimes what that was. And then I read John Green's Turtle All the Way Down, and I swear if I ever meet John Green, I'm going to give him such a huge hug, because he's the first person to ever have put into words and accurately verbalized my worry spirals. And
right.
so when I read that Turtles All the Way Down, and it's about a girl who has OCD and a couple other things, and she talks about her thinking process and how it spirals out of control, and the way she was describing it was just like, oh my God, that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Somebody's finally been able to verbalize that. And I remember running in and shoving the book in my husband's face and going, read this paragraph right here. Read it right now. And he's like, I'm watching. I don't care. Read it right
Mm-hmm.
now. You have to read this. And it was that first time I was able to articulate, this is what my brain is doing. And I would not have been able to do that if someone else had not been able to find the words to write it down. So I love when you say it's not an original idea. Sure, it's not an original idea, but you took somebody else's words or thoughts and managed to put them down in a way that somebody else, I guarantee you, is going to read that and be like, oh my God, that's me. I totally get what you're saying. Yes, this is
Right.
it. And I love that about all of you writers. And I tell I'm also an accountability manager
Yeah.
for a book publishing academy. And I tell all of the writers that I coach, look, you are not, and I heard this at the conference that I went to in April, and I've said it multiple times, you're not writing your book for you. I mean, you are, but you're also writing your book for someone who is going to read that book and be hit like a ton of bricks with, oh my God, this is me. Someone is going through this same thing and has been able to verbalize it. This is me. Holy crap. And that is going to change their life. And that's what I really love about all of you writers that I talk to every time, is you're going to write something that is going to change somebody's life.
Yeah, I said in better. I wrote the book, and I understood that as a self-published author, and somebody in Nashville, Tennessee, odds are this is not going to be picked up, not become a New York Times bestseller, not going to make me a millionaire. That wasn't the intention. I said if some person reads this book and makes some positive changes in their life and sends me a nice note, that's mission accomplished. Well, it's got 119 reviews, 5-star reviews, telling me exactly that. It's changed the life. It changed their life. And as a writer, and with Here Come the Nothing Heads, especially because it's a different type of book. Nothing excites me. Nothing makes me happier than a person that comes to me and says, "Hey, I read that Here Come the Nothing Heads book, and I thought it was just some silly children's book, and I started reading it, and then I realized, oh, there's something else here." And I read a few more pages, like, oh. So when people smell what the rock is cooking, I really like that.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you have that many positive reviews because it is an amazing book. It truly, truly is. I was trying to think of what was my favorite part, and I literally can't come up with one because it's just so good. And I love. It's one of the things that I've really loved about running this bookstore and doing this podcast and getting to know all of you guys is that getting to know all of you guys, you just had such an amazing effect on my life because your words are so good. And I keep telling people every single time that I see a remake of a movie or I see something that's been redone 5,000 times, I just want to point at my bookshelf where I have all your books and go, but really though,
Right.
We're almost out of time. So last question.
Shoot.
If there's anything that you could impart on your readers that you would want them to take away from your books, what would it be?
All of my actually I've actually asked for that question. So I sat down right after when I was releasing Here Come the Nothing Heads last year. I've written now 4 books, and I decided I needed to coalesce those into a publishing company. I needed to get serious about marketing these books and getting these ideas and getting these words and stories out there. So I formed a publishing company called the Coalition for Human Kindness.
I love that.
Abiding in kindness for ourselves, for others, and for the world around us. And if you're going to read any of my books, and it's better self-help for the rest of us, I tried to find the theme that was narrating, going through all of those, and I decided that the theme was be kind. So the website for the Coalition for Human Kindness is the Be Kind Club, is bekindclub.org. And so the message, if you take away one thing from anything I've written, is to be kind. Now here's the trick. You can't be kind. If you're trying to be kind and then you're trying to do something and you're separating yourself from a person that you're being kind to. Being kind isn't about doing kind thing, isn't about random acts of kindness. Being kind is abiding in kindness, about losing the separation of yourself, your others, the world around you, and just living in love, living in kindness, living in joy.
I love that. That's such a great way to end this. Terry, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and just kind of having a conversation with me. And I love every single conversation I have with you guys for these podcasts. Every single one goes a completely different, unexpected way. And I really, really love that. So thank you for taking me on a philosophical journey today.
Well, thank you. You're my hero. We sit in our rooms and bang on our keyboards, and every once in a while we find a warrior who's willing to help us get the words out there, and I'm very thankful to have you in my life.
Oh, well, thank you. You're going to make me cry. Stop. Well, Terry, thank you so much. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And I look forward to your next book. And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Spine Bookcast, Chronicles of a Bookshop. And you can pick up Terry's book at our website, thespinebookshop.com. And thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you all have a great day and happy reading.